You are about to witness one of the most impactful stories of your life. Watch it until the end, and I assure you that the way you see life will never be the same again. Daniel Herrera was never the kind of man to leave loose ends. At 45, his life seemed meticulously planned. Successful businesses, a dazzling new girlfriend, a luxury vacation on the horizon. Anyone who saw him that October morning, gracefully crossing the lobby of Mexico City International Airport, would have thought he had everything under control. But the truth is that there are certain encounters that no amount of money in the world can avoid. And that day, a single voice was enough to crumble the castle of certainties he had built over the years. It was at the Aeromexico first-class counter that fate decided to make its appearance. A familiar voice, firm yet tinged with nervousness, asked, "Passenger name?" Daniel froze. He recognized that intonation even before looking up, and when he did, time stood still. There, before him, wearing the airline's impeccable uniform and with an unmistakably pregnant belly, was Camilla, his ex-wife. The woman with whom he had shared 5 years of life, dreams, and a bitter farewell 8 months earlier. He didn't know where to look. Everything he had tried to bury in that divorce resurfaced in seconds. The evident pregnancy, her professional demeanor, the silence laden with history between them, and above all, the question exploding in his mind like a red alert. Was that child his? The pieces fit. The last night they spent together still lingered in his memory, a mixture of hurt, desire, and farewell. Even as Camilla tried to hide her emotion, her face said more than any word. Valeria, his current girlfriend, didn't understand a thing. She tried to fill the space with empty phrases and rehearsed poses, but Daniel was somewhere else, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something he couldn't control. The life he thought he had completely mastered was about to turn upside down, and he knew that encounter wasn't a coincidence. It was a breaking point. Something was about to change, and deep down, he no longer knew if he was ready for what was coming. The sound of the airport seemed distant as Daniel tried to regain his composure. The world around him kept moving, but inside him, everything had come to a standstill. Camilla, for her part, maintained her professional demeanor, though her hands trembled slightly as she typed the data into the system. Her eyes avoided his, but the tension between them was impossible to hide. She seemed resolute, yet there was something in her gestures that betrayed a hidden turmoil. The woman he saw there was no longer the same as before, and at the same time, she still was, and that deeply unsettled him. "Daniel Herrera and Valeria Montoya," he replied, his voice slightly choked. Camilla nodded with an almost robotic movement and continued with the service. Her fingers typed with precision, as if it were just another task of the day, but Daniel knew it wasn't. Neither of them had prepared for this reunion, much less him, who had planned a romantic trip with Valeria to Cancun, thinking he was finally turning the page. But pages that are barely turned sooner or later rebel and start to scream again. While Camilla printed the boarding passes, Daniel couldn't take his eyes off her hands. He remembered when those same hands used to draft designs during quiet early mornings, when they still dreamed together of a promising future. She was an architect, one of the best he had ever known. She had bold ideas, a human vision of spaces, and a contagious passion for sustainable architecture. But all that had been swallowed up by the routine he imposed, by his projects, by his choices. Now, there she was, behind a counter, and pregnant. Camilla handed over the boarding passes with her head bowed. "Have a good flight," she said without looking up. Their fingers brushed for a brief second, and the shock of that contact was enough to revive memories Daniel thought he had buried. But nothing was really dead there. While he walked away, pulling his suitcase with Valeria by his side, Something inside him seemed to pull him in the opposite direction, as if the real journey he was meant to embark on was something else. And at that moment, without fully understanding what he was feeling, he realized that Day would not be like the others. The airport's VIP lounge seemed like another world. Isolated from the noise of rushing passengers, it offered comfort and luxury. Leather chairs, 18-year-old whiskey, and cushioned silence. Daniel sat down without a word, staring at the glass in front of him as if the answer to the chaos in his mind were hidden inside it. Valeria went to the restroom, probably to update her social media with photos of the dream trip, and it was there, alone, that he finally faced what had just happened. The image of Camilla, in that uniform accentuated by her pregnancy and her tired yet firm eyes, wouldn't leave his head. He remembered how it all began, the first time he saw Camilla, freshly graduated, at the inauguration of one of his first buildings. While everyone flattered the entrepreneur of the moment, she dared to criticize the project. She said that the building could be more than an imposing structure. It could be useful for the community. That frankness disarmed him. She wasn't impressed by his last name, nor by his imported cars. And perhaps that's why he fell for her so quickly. Over time, however, it was precisely that authenticity that he came to see as a threat. Daniel had always wanted control. He controlled businesses, deadlines, even feelings. When he presented the prenuptial agreement to Camila, he made it seem like just a formality, something common among businessmen. She, in love and trusting, signed without reading. Later, she quit her job to help him expand his empire, something that was supposed to last only a few months, but ended up consuming years of her career. He claimed to be grateful, but he never reciprocated the same support. And in the end, when the relationship began to crumble, she was the one who left empty-handed, literally, not even receiving recognition for everything she had built alongside him. When Valeria returned, she sat down with a rehearsed smile and eyes glued to her phone. "Are you okay? You seemed off at the counter." Daniel took a deep breath. "That was my ex-wife," he replied bluntly. Valeria's eyes widened, a mix of surprise and a hint of disdain. Her, working at the airport. She laughed in a way that immediately irritated him. "She was an architect," he replied curtly. "One of the best." But Valeria didn't understand, and maybe she wasn't even interested in understanding. In her mind, that was just an inconvenient detail threatening her perfect vacation. For Daniel, however, it was the start of an internal avalanche he still didn't know how to contain. While the private plane was preparing for takeoff, Daniel gazed out the window as if expecting to see Camilla there among the airport staff. Of course, she wouldn't be there, but the thought wouldn't leave his head. He felt like an imposter, about to fly to an artificial paradise with a woman he barely truly knew, while someone who had shared years of his life was there, working, pregnant, invisible to the world he so valued. The takeoff was smooth, but inside him, everything was turbulence. During the flight, Valeria talked excitedly about the Cancun resort, star-studded dinners, private dives. Daniel listened with an absent smile, pretending to be present. The truth was that his mind was miles away, trapped in the past, trying to understand how things had come to this point. When did he stop seeing Camilla as a partner and start viewing her as an obstacle? And why, even after everything, did her image in that uniform still hurt more than it should? The question that wouldn't stop echoing was simple. Why didn't she say she was pregnant? Upon arrival at the resort, everything seemed perfect, almost too perfect. The room with a sea view, the expensive wine waiting in the suite, the impeccable service. But none of it made sense. Daniel felt out of place, as if he were playing a role that no longer suited him. Valeria, on the other hand, was in her natural habitat, She photographed everything, posted self-help phrases as captions, and toasted to the perfect life. And there, between sips, Daniel had a revelation. Perhaps all that perfection was just a disguise for something empty. The next morning, he woke up earlier than usual. He went to the balcony and watched the sea. The Caribbean blue was hypnotic, but his thoughts were far away. He grabbed his cell phone and called his mother. He needed answers. "Camila is living in Narvarte," she said. "And yes, the baby is yours. I knew. Your grandmother did too. But we respected her wish not to involve you." Daniel fell silent. His mother continued with that coldness that concealed a layer of hurt. "You built an empire, son, but you left a lot of important things behind. And now, maybe it's not too late to reclaim them." Daniel hung up with trembling hands. His mother's confirmation hit him like a punch in the stomach. The child was his. It was no longer a distant possibility. It was a fact. And the hardest part, he hadn't done anything about it until then. He didn't know about the medical appointments, didn't know where Camila lived, how she was living if she needed help. He knew nothing, and that, for someone who had always had everything under control, was unbearable. The thought consuming him now was direct. He had failed her, and the child who hadn't even been born yet. Valeria appeared on the balcony in a silk robe, with a smile that completely ignored the emotional hurricane unfolding there. "Shall we have breakfast at the spa buffet? Then I was thinking of scheduling a couple's massage." Daniel just nodded. He didn't have the strength to start an argument, but inside, something had changed. The charm he once felt for Valeria now seemed like a mirage. Everything about her appeared exaggerated, superficial, rehearsed, and above all, disconnected. Disconnected from real life, from pain, from the dilemmas that were crashing over him like ever-growing waves. On the way to the hotel restaurant, Daniel received a message from his grandmother. "Camila has an ultrasound this afternoon. She's going alone. Just wanted you to know." Along with the message, an old photo of Camila smiling with a project in her hands. It was the kind of memory that cut deep. He remembered how she used to talk about architecture with eyes that sparkled, how she dreamed of designing affordable, sustainable, and humane homes, and how he had ignored all of that, prioritizing only his own interests. Suddenly, the five-star restaurant and the imported coffee seemed irrelevant. He needed to be somewhere else. By the end of that morning, Daniel made a quiet decision. He told Valeria he needed to take care of an urgent work matter in Mexico City and that she could stay at the resort for a few more days. She pretended to understand, but her expression betrayed her frustration. "Promise you'll be back by Thursday. We have dinner with the investors." He didn't promise. He just smiled and said, "Take care." Deep down, he knew that this return trip wasn't just to attend the ultrasound. It was a deeper return, a reunion with who he once was, with whom he had abandoned, and perhaps with whom he could still be. The flight back was silent. Daniel didn't touch the whiskey, nor did he open his laptop. He just looked out the window, reflecting. He thought about everything he had let slip away. The sleepless nights Camila must have spent alone, the decisions she had to make without support, and the child growing inside her, a child of his. He had never felt so burdened by his own choices. He had always thought that success was about control, profit, expansion. Now, he saw that success could be something else, something more intimate, more silent, like being present where it really mattered. Upon landing, he didn't go to the office or home. He asked the driver to take him straight to the clinic where Camila would have the exam. On the way, anxiety tightened his chest. What if she sent him away? What if she didn't want to see him? He wouldn't have the right to complain, but he needed to try. He knew he couldn't. change the past, but maybe there was still room to rebuild the present, or at least to be a part of his child's future. When he arrived, he saw Donna Sofia, his grandmother, in the waiting room. She stood up upon seeing him, with that look that mixed reproach and hope. "It was about time," she said simply. Camilla was in the examination room. Daniel didn't enter. He preferred to wait outside, his heart beating faster than in any business meeting he had ever had. When she came out, accompanied by the doctor, she paused in surprise at seeing him. Her eyes stared at him for a few seconds, wordless. He stood up and with a lump in his throat simply said, "I'm sorry. I know I have no right to ask for anything, but I want to try to be present, if you allow me." Camilla took a deep breath. She didn't answer immediately. She was tired, visibly shaken. But in that moment, she didn't send him away. Next to the clinic was a small cafe, one of those with wooden tables and the aroma of real coffee. They sat there like two old acquaintances, trying to figure out if they still knew how to talk. Daniel listened more than he spoke. Camilla talked about the pregnancy, about working at the airport, about the nights she had thought of giving up, but carried on for the baby. He listened in silence, feeling each sentence as a lesson. And for the first time, he didn't try to justify anything. He simply listened. When she finished speaking, he asked for a chance, not to rekindle their romance, but to be a father, a present, real, committed father. The days that followed were filled with a different kind of silence between them. There was no bitterness dripping from every unspoken word. Instead, a space was being built, slowly, carefully, as if they were creating a new foundation over the ruins of everything that had collapsed. Daniel began sending simple messages. "Do you need anything from the market? How was your shift today? Did the baby kick?" And gradually, Camilla began to reply. A word here, a sentence there. It was little, but it was real, and he knew he would have to show his intentions through actions, not promises. One Saturday afternoon, Camilla invited him to join her at the craft fair in Mexico City. She said she wanted to buy fabrics for the baby's room decor. It was a small gesture, but full of meaning. Daniel arrived punctually, wearing jeans and a simple shirt. No suit, no chauffeur. They walked among the stalls, and he observed her with different eyes. Every choice she made, every explanation about colors and patterns seemed laden with intention. She was still an architect, only now she was building with other materials. Courage, love, resilience. At one point, Camilla held up a piece of blue fabric with green details. "This one looks like it could be for a crib, right?" she said, almost smiling. Daniel nodded in agreement, but did not reply. There was a lump in his throat. It wasn't just about the fabric. It was the gesture, the silent complicity, the real possibility of being there, sharing that moment with her. At the end of the fair, they sat in a small cafe and ordered 2 cafés de olla. Camilla, more at ease, asked if he was still with Valeria. Daniel replied with a simple, "Not anymore." And at that moment, she didn't ask why. She simply nodded. And that was enough. Daniel shared that he had fired his lawyer, that he was reviewing the divorce documents, and that he intended to formalize a support fund for his child's education and life. "I'm not doing this to ease my conscience," he said. "I'm doing it because it's the right thing, because it's the least I can do." Camilla listened in silence, taking a sip of coffee. "Do you still want to change the world with your buildings?" she asked, with a slight smile at the corner of her mouth. He shrugged. "I want to start by changing my own world, and if there's energy left, we'll see about the rest." It was the first time they laughed together in a long time. A few days later, Daniel scheduled a meeting with the directors of his company. He didn't just want to review numbers or targets. He wanted to present a new project. He brought out Camilla's old sketches, the ones she had done years ago about sustainable housing in peripheral regions. "I ignored these drawings in the past," he began, "but today I know they represent the future I want for this company." There was surprise, resistance, questions, but there was also admiration. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about figures but impact, and that stirred something in everyone in the room. At the end of that meeting, he left with the firm decision to create a new division: sustainable development and social housing. And more than that, he wanted Camilla to lead the project when she was ready. He knew she needed her time and that now the priority was the pregnancy. But for the first time in years, he was willing to wait. Everything he had built up to that point began to make sense when he imagined his child growing up in a better world, where their father was not just a businessman, but someone who tried to do the right thing, even if it was late. Meanwhile, Camilla was also rebuilding. In her modest apartment in Narvarte, she reorganized her old files, reviewed projects, and rediscovered her passion for creation, partly because of the strength she had always had, partly because Daniel had finally stopped interfering. And perhaps deep down, she also saw that something inside him had changed. Not that she had come to fully trust him again, not yet, but she no longer saw him as a stranger, and in her own way, she began to accept that perhaps, just maybe, it was possible to build something new from the ruins. On a clear-skied morning, Daniel picked her up for a medical consultation. It was the first time he would officially accompany her as a father. In the car, the two were silent, but not uncomfortable. When they arrived, Camilla grabbed her purse, looked at him and said, "If you want to come in with me, you can." It was a simple invitation without grand ceremony, but to Daniel it carried the weight of absolution. Seated beside her, facing the screen that showed the baby, he saw for the first time what truly mattered. It wasn't the name on a building's facade. It was that little heart beating inside. That was it. That was everything. As they left the clinic, Camilla seemed lighter. Daniel, for his part, felt different. As if he had crossed through a door he never knew existed. As they walked side by side to the car, she mentioned that the doctor had suggested some changes to her diet and that she planned to start prenatal yoga classes. Daniel listened attentively, absorbing every detail as if he were learning the language of a new world. A world where he wasn't the center, but part of something greater. For the first time in a long time, he felt useful in a way no amount of money could ever provide. When he dropped her off at home, Camilla hesitated before getting out of the car. "Daniel, thank you for today." He simply smiled, trying to hold back his emotion. There was no longer a need for declarations or certainties. Just that moment was more than he had ever imagined regaining. When she closed the door, he stood there for a few minutes, looking at the simple building, its peeling facade, the plants in the window on the first floor. And he thought, she deserves so much more, not out of pity, but out of respect for everything she is, and for everything he had neglected for so long. That night, Daniel didn't return to the luxurious apartment in Polanco. He went to his grandmother's house instead. They sat in the garden drinking cinnamon tea, just like in the old days. Donna Sofia watched him with that look of someone who sees far more than they say. "So?" she asked. Daniel smiled in a way that mixed regret with hope. "I think I'm beginning to understand what my father tried to tell me that day. That success without purpose is just an elegant form of emptiness." The grandmother nodded silently. "And Camilla?" she asked afterward. "She let me into the room. She let me see the baby." Donna Sofia didn't answer. She simply held his hand and squeezed it affectionately. In the following days, Daniel began to reorganize not only his routine, but his mindset. He cancelled events, postponed meetings he once considered unmissable, and started attending gatherings with the new project team. He visited communities, listened to residents, and heard stories that until then had been invisible to him. The more he listened, the more he understood what Camilla had tried to tell him years ago. Building buildings is easy. The hard part is truly building dignity. And perhaps that was what he was trying to do now, trying to build his own from scratch. One Saturday afternoon, Daniel showed up unexpectedly at the local market where Camilla usually bought fruits. He was different, lighter, without that air of superiority he used to carry. He came with a reusable bag and a glass jar of pancakes. He claimed he had made himself with an online recipe, he said. Camilla laughed, more surprised by the act than by the gesture itself. She accepted the food with a skeptical smile, and for the first time, the two spent hours together without talking about the past. They talked about music, childhood, possible names for the baby. It was like rediscovering a friendship that should never have been set aside. A few days later, she invited him to a simple dinner at her apartment. Rice, beans, sautéed vegetables, real food, as she used to say. During the meal, Daniel noticed the crooked pictures on the wall, the old books, the unfinished projects scattered on the dining table. It was a small space, but full of life. And there, amidst that simplicity, he understood. Camilla had built a home, on her own, without depending on anyone, and that, contrary to what he had believed for years, didn't diminish her. It made her even greater. After dinner, they sat on the sofa, listening to an old playlist she had put together from the days when they were married. The music brought back memories, both good and bad. Daniel wanted to speak, to apologize again, to explain how blind, selfish, and absent he had been. But Camilla simply put a finger on his lips and whispered, "I know. Now just show me." It was the greatest act of emotional maturity he had ever witnessed. Camilla didn't want promises or speeches. She wanted presence, coherence between words and actions, and he understood the message. In the following weeks, Daniel didn't miss any medical appointments, helped set up the crib, and participated in meetings with the architecture team that now proudly included Camilla's name among those responsible for the new social housing project. People began to notice that something in him had truly changed. And the most curious thing was that he noticed it too. He slept better, smiled more often, felt proud not of what he owned, but of what he was building with meaning. For the first time in years, Daniel Herrera felt whole, and most importantly, he felt deserving of the title that was soon to come, Father. On the eve of the birth, Camila began to feel the first contractions even during her shift at the airport. A colleague rushed her to the hospital, and upon admission to the maternity ward, she asked for Daniel to be called. He arrived in less than 20 minutes, breathless, his expression a mix of nervousness and tenderness. That scene, which could have been marked by distance or formality, was imbued with something much more powerful: presence. He held her hand tightly, breathing with her through the contractions, and for the first time, he felt deeply that it wasn't the businessman who mattered. It was the man, the partner, the father. The delivery was normal, without complications, but nothing that night was ordinary. When Daniel heard the baby's cry for the first time, he cried too. He truly cried, in a way he hadn't in years. It wasn't just the emotion of witnessing his child's birth. It was the pain for what he had almost lost, the gratitude for being there, and the certainty that everything he had built until that moment was worth less than that instant. Camilla, exhausted, looked at him with teary yet peaceful eyes. For the first time, it seemed that everything was exactly where it should be. The past wasn't erased, but it had finally been understood. The next day, as he held his child in his arms, Daniel made a promise, not one of those empty promises made at the beginning of a relationship or in business contracts, but one whispered from the heart. He promised to be present, honest, protective, that he wouldn't measure love in material things, but in time, attention, and care. That he would walk side by side, even if his relationship with Camilla would never be what it once was. He wanted to be there, completely, building with her, even if only as a father. And that, for him, was already enough to give meaning to an entire lifetime. Camilla watched from afar, still in recovery, and felt something she didn't expect: admiration. Not for who Daniel had been, but for who he was becoming. A man who made mistakes, yes, but decided to change, who set aside his pride to reclaim what was essential. When he approached with the baby in his arms, he whispered, "May I stay here tonight?" She looked at him for a few seconds and answered with a smile, "Of course. This is your home too now." And at that moment, without speeches or background music, the two understood. They were finally rebuilding something that was worth far more than any empire of concrete. In the months that followed, life changed completely for Daniel. Mornings no longer began with emails and meetings, but with baby bottles, diapers, and sleepy smiles. He discovered the joy of cooking baby food, telling stories in funny voices, and watching his child sleep for long moments in absolute silence. The sleepless nights didn't bother him. In fact, they were constant reminders that he was living something genuine. More than being a present father, he was becoming a better man, and not out of necessity, but by choice. Camilla returned to work, this time not as an airport employee, but as the chief architect of a project she had designed years ago, and that now, finally, was coming to life. The team of the company's new social housing division was composed mostly of women, young talents, and professionals who, like her, sought to build with purpose. Daniel made sure not to interfere in anything. He simply offered the resources, the space, and the trust. Seeing Camilla shine was, for him, the greatest proof that he had chosen the right path. And with every new brick laid, he felt closer to who he always should have been. Today, if someone asked Daniel what the most important day of his life was, he doesn't hesitate. It wasn't when he closed the biggest contract of his career, nor when he bought his first building. It was the day he looked at a pregnant woman behind a counter and understood, without her having to say a word, everything he had lost. And it was also the day he decided to change, because sometimes life doesn't shout, it whispers. And if you have the courage to listen, you might discover that it's never too late to rebuild, nor to love, nor to come back home. Quote of the day: "It's never too late to start over when what's at stake is everything that money can never buy." Thank you for watching until the end. Comment with the city you're watching from. We want to know just how far our stories are reaching. Until the next video.